Welcome to our Instrumentl webinar, Inside the Federal Funding Shakeup. We are coming up on the 10th month of what has been, for grant professionals and many others, a chaotic and turbulent year. Honestly, it feels like it's been many lifetimes since the federal funding shakeup began. A few months ago, one of our customers, Roseanne, actually, Roseanne, if you're in the room, let us know in the chat. A few months ago, Roseanne emailed me. It was something along the lines of, I know a lot is changing in the landscape, federal grants are shifting, and I'm seeing what feels like an increase in competitiveness for grants that should have felt easy or easier to win. And are others seeing this too? Roseanne wanted to know. And Roseanne was not the only one asking. Many of you at our weekly events also wanted to understand what's actually happening in the world of grants. Am I the only one seeing what I'm seeing? Are others feeling it too? So we ran a survey to our user base here on Instrumentl to understand exactly what nonprofits are feeling and experiencing right now, and how they're continuing to win grants, grow revenue, and deliver on their missions. So those findings are what we'll be unpacking in today's webinar. And we'll be joined by two ultra knowledgeable federal grant experts to give the data a little bit more color and share guidance on what's next and how to best prepare. If you haven't seen that report yet, I'm going to put that in the chat for you all to check out. There's a lot of really good nuggets of wisdom in there. And for any of our first timers in the room, I'm actually going to end this poll and share it out so we can all take a look. We have a lot of first-timers in the room. Welcome. It's so fun to have you here. Instrumentl is the most loved all-in-one grants platform for prospecting, tracking, and management. And we help over 5,000 nonprofits and grant consultants save time in finding, applying for, and winning more grants. And you'll actually get to see Instrumentl in action and even take it for a spin later today. So hang tight. Some quick FYIs about today's event. It'll be an hour long, and this includes our presentation, our Q&A, and a little hands-on prospecting inside Instrumentl. And as we move through the hour together, if you have questions, please drop them in the chat box. I'll save them all and try to bring up as many as possible for our Q&A at the end. For folks tuning in on YouTube, same goes for you. We're going to be watching that chat. This event is being recorded. You'll get the replay shared directly with you later this week. And lastly, I know we are all very busy. We're working hard. Q4 is in full swing, and Grant Summit is right around the corner. Are any of you going to Grant Summit? Let us know in the chat if we're going to see you there. All of this to say, thank you for taking time out of your day today to be here. If you need to, okay, a lot of Grant Summit folks. Nice. Okay, well, we're going to have a huge team there. You should go check it out. For folks who don't know what Grant Summit is, it's a big conference for grant professionals. It's happening in Baltimore next week. If you need to step away at any point, feel free to do so. We will be right here. But I do want you to stick around till the end, because y'all are going to be the very first to hear about and see some super exciting updates coming to Instrumentl. But of course, that's not all we'll be sending you off with. In our hour together, we're also going to cover the key strategies that grant professionals are pivoting to keep funding flowing, even in this tricky landscape. We'll hear directly from two federal grant experts who will share advice and best practices for navigating both public and private grants. And lastly, when you roll up your sleeves in today's workshop, you'll be able to walk away with a brand new list of active grant opportunities, custom matched to your organization. And as I've already alluded to, there's something else I'm very excited to share, and even all of you familiar faces who have been to so many of our webinars. I see you, Alan. I see you, Sarah. This is going to be news to you, so I'm super excited to get to that. Before we dive in, again, we have a lot of new timers, so I'm just going to introduce myself very quickly. I'm Nia. I'm an events and community manager here at Instrumentl, and my job is to develop helpful and educational events like this one to share with our Instrumentl community. I actually come from the nonprofit world. Prior to this, I worked in rainforest conservation and research, but I'm not the expert in the room today. I want to introduce our fantastic panelists. Rachel Werner, and Fielding Jezreel. If you're a regular here, you know this is the fourth event Rachel has done with us this year. Let me know in the chat if any of you have been to those early ones. They have all been sold out events, just like this one. Yeah, Mary's been to them. Maureen says, thanks, Rachel. Rachel is the owner and CEO of RBW Strategy, a grants consulting firm in the DC metro area. The RBW team have raised over 240 million and managed over 2.5 billion dollars in federal grant awards. Rachel is also a principal at My Fed Trainer, offering compliance training to thousands of people about the complexities of federal grant awards. Rachel, thanks for picking up every time I call. It's a pleasure to have you back here always. And we're also joined by Fielding, who is brand new to our stage, but someone whose posts I've been turning to for many months to make sense of what's happening. Fielding is the founder and CEO of Jezreel Consulting, where she's helped nonprofits secure over $135 million across 12 agencies. She's also the founder and resident expert of the Federal Grant Accelerator, a learning community for small to mid-sized nonprofits and the grant professionals who serve them. I love all the love we're getting in the chat for Rachel and Fielding. This is truly a powerhouse lineup right here, folks. I am so excited to dive into it. Barbara, I see you saying the YouTube stream is not working. We are checking on it right now. I have Shaylee making sure we get that up and running for our YouTube folks. Okay, before I hand it over to Rachel and Fielding, I want to hear from you all. Have you felt the impact of changes to federal funding? To whatever extent you feel comfortable sharing, yes, no, a story, maybe you've lost funding, maybe grants are in jeopardy. Okay, I'm seeing a lot, I'm seeing a lot of yeses. Some somewhat, ouch, yes, yes, okay. If you're not a yes, the fact that you're here at this webinar, though, tells me that it's definitely top of mind for you. So let's get into what the hundreds of nonprofits that we surveyed told us. How are they feeling? And perhaps most importantly, what are they doing to adapt? I'm going to share a few of those highlights and then invite Rachel and Fielding to answer all of our most burning questions. So all of you who just said yes in the chat right now, there was a lot of yeses. You are not alone. 4 in every 5 nonprofits we surveyed reported being affected by the shifts that have occurred this year. That is a huge chunk, 85%, right? That's huge. It includes over half of our respondents who actually lost funding. So organizations like Erica's in this case, which lost millions of dollars in an instant. I saw some of you in the chat also talking about awards that you've lost. There are also folks that have lost planned grants, meaning grants they were planning to apply to, maybe ones they were really relying on winning, have disappeared from their pipeline, either because the grant itself has been terminated or because changes to the RFP have made the organization suddenly ineligible for that funding, right? Priorities shift, and suddenly the people you serve or the cause area you support are no longer funded by the source that you assumed was gonna be really reliable. So this leads to my next point here, which is that 60% of organizations say their mission does not align with what the federal government is prioritizing. I'm really curious here. Let me know in the chat if you feel comfortable. Give me a yes or no. Do you feel like your organization is well aligned with government priorities? Give me a yes, aligned, or no, not aligned. And yes, Siobhan, I love that call out. 60% is huge. Okay, we're seeing a lot of no's, some yeses, but a lot of no's, some used to be's. Okay, so this is my moment to hand the mic over to our experts in the room to help me dig into this a little further. And Fielding, I want to start with you here. For organizations that feel a level of misalignment with government priorities right now, are federal grants just off the table? Is there something they can be doing to stay proactive, but also stay true to their mission?
I appreciate this question coming to me in part because for years I have been very vocal in advocating that small and mid-sized nonprofits need to consider federal grants as a part of their grant strategy. Like this has been my primary distinctive factor in the grants world is like, I am this huge advocate for small and mid-sized nonprofits getting into the federal game and really trying to break down these misconceptions about the complexity, the fear, right? All of these things that come along with federal grants. And with the new limitations around DEI, because so many small to mid-sized nonprofits are also organizations that are more proximate to the communities that they're serving, often have sort of cross-cutting themes with DEI, whether it is explicit or not. I'm really having to rethink this, right? And it's been a really challenging year, and I've had other consultants reach out and say, is it even ethical to be encouraging a federal grant strategy this year, knowing what we know? And yes, we need to be thinking about this differently. And so here's kind of a broad overview of my take. If you are an organization that is organized around DEI values, right? Your mission, your vision, it's explicitly DEI in some way. And your organization has had conversations about sanitizing language, and that feels really icky, right? There's not broad agreement that that would be an okay process. It's probably not worth your time in 2025 and 2026 to go after federal grants. And that is very hard for me to say because I've been saying the exact opposite and trying to convince people of this for years. So I don't say that lightly. On the flip side, if your organization is willing to sanitize language, if you're willing to reframe your work in your communication, I think there's a pathway here. Now, there are also some risks to that approach, and we can talk more about that. But grant writing, in my opinion, has always been a game, right? One of the first things you learn as a grant writer is to mirror the language of the funder. And so, and of course, you don't want to pass your own, moral, ethical boundaries, right? So these are really internal conversations that have to be happening. But if you're willing to play the game, I think there's still an approach to federal grants to be had. And on top of both of those things, what I think is brand new in federal grant seeking strategy is that we need to be thinking ahead of time about what our legal access is. Like, how are we going to access legal help? There are numerous stories I have heard about organizations needing to access legal assistance very quickly for an appeal. And if you have that pathway already defined, I think you're in a much better position. So I'll stop there because there's so much to talk about here. But these are conversations that have to be had internally, and I don't think these are grant writer decisions, right? A lot of this is organizational leadership that has to really weigh in. We as a grant writer bring the context, we bring the expertise in the grants field, but a lot of these conversations have to go a lot deeper.
Absolutely, Fielding, and we're seeing a lot of folks in the chat very much agreeing with what you're saying and also appreciating your candor. Rachel, I'm curious, is there anything you want to add there?
Yeah, I mean, I think Fielding covered a lot, so I don't know if I'm gonna add too much to it, but just to say that I think that, as she said, it's really important to look at that eligibility criteria. And in addition, because I focus a lot on grant management, it's also important to understand that that notice of grant award is a legal document. So you have to be very clear about what you are signing up for when you accept that funding. And I think it's also the fact that because nonprofits, there's so much of focus on the values, and because the work is mission based, that's really what we do to support beneficiaries. That's and all public sector organizations as well. So I think the conversations that are being had are very much a case by case basis. So it's important to say that you can't blanket a certain response or approach, because it's going to be very dependent on how your organization decides to move forward. But I also want to say there is no judgment. This is not a reflection on you as an organization if you have to modify your approach. It really is a way to stay current, because what you're there for is to support the beneficiary. So I always want to keep the eye on the prize. You're not there to, obviously, you as a nonprofit are there to support and keep the lights on and keep things going, but you're really there to support your beneficiaries. You're really there to support your community. So I think it's important to just keep that in mind, top of mind. So however we need to navigate this is going to be very, case by case. And I will also say, with regard to the federal priorities, in addition to a lot of the targeted populations, it's also to note the things that they are looking at. So there might be areas that you might align, like they're really focused more on rural communities, infrastructure, obviously not innovation in the areas of energy efficiency, but there is a focus on community-based growth. So there are areas that might align with you. And, so just to be clear, also workforce development. So there could be areas that might fit in with what you're doing. So that's just also what I'll add in terms of the future.
Yeah, and we had a question from Christy in the chat actually to our attendees, which was, has anybody had to revise DEI language for a submitted federal grant application? And so speaking to this idea of, having to change up how we're portraying our work, we have a lot of folks saying yes, like we are revising, right? Okay, all of this said, we had a lot of people saying they feel misaligned, but we did have some yeses, right? There were some folks in the chat who were like, I actually feel pretty aligned with government priorities. This was something that we saw a similar sentiment expressed in our survey. A handful of folks are actually leaning further into federal grants, or at least continuing to explore them proactively. So the question I have here, and Rachel, I'll start with you this time, is for folks that aren't excluding the possibility of pursuing federal grants in the near future, what should they be doing right now to prepare? Like, do we have any intel or early signs on what federal grant making might look like?
So let me get my crystal ball. No, yeah, but no, I think that's a good question. And I put in the chat a link to if you haven't seen it, it is the White House's FY26 discretionary budget, and that really outlines their priorities. Now, of course, this is what is currently being it's right now. It still needs to be authorized by Congress. That's what the holdup is right now, because you can see a lot of the programs that they're looking to cut, some they want to add to, but you can kind of get a sense across the different agencies, what those priorities are. And of course, that's going to trickle down into the funding opportunity announcements, and also going to trickle down into, state opportunities, because most of the federal grants, especially pass through, go through states or local government. I will say this: if you are pursuing grants, if that is part of your strategy, in FY26, you definitely want to be aware of the recent executive order that was issued on August 7th about federal grant making, because that is going to impact the process. So in addition to the more bureaucratic process that takes place anyway with regard to grant making, they want to have an appointed political appointee within each of the agencies overseeing that process. So there's going to be more review of the terms and conditions. There's going to be more scrutiny in terms of the specific organizations that might be receiving funding. And there's also going to be a longer process with regard to the funding drawdowns. So before, there are two types of ways you could draw down funding, which was cash advance or reimbursement. We're looking at more of the reimbursement. So I'm just saying that could take longer, which will impact you to pay off your contractors, or if you have subrecipients. So factor that in, because it could take a longer time to not only receive funding, but also to find out, the awards, and the terms and conditions are probably going to look a little bit different as well. So there's other considerations, but I don't want to, go too far in the weeds, but those are just some things I want you to think about. Like, understanding the terms and conditions is incredibly important. So.
And Fielding, anything that you want to add from your perspective with the organizations that you work with?
Yeah, two things to add. So one, building off what Rachel shared, a lot of this is going to get pressure tested, right? And as organizations push back, and as organizations appeal decisions, as we see whether this political appointee over each agency stands, right? I think a lot of these things are going to be pressure tested in court. And so, does everything that has been announced stay for the next 18 months? Probably not in exactly its form. And we're probably going to see additional communication come out and additional guidance come out. And so I think that is what feels so exhausting in this moment. I mean, beyond sort of the obvious attacks on DEI or specific organizations not being eligible, it's also just this constant churn of information and trying to make sure that the day at which you identify an opportunity and the day at which you submit and then the day at which you might get an award, like everything has changed so quickly. So I just want to acknowledge that, in the opening poll, there's like, all these comments about, are you feeling overwhelmed? Do you feel, are you just kind of checked out, right? I mean, I think all of us kind of cycle through these things because there is so much that's changing so rapidly. The other point I want to make here is that if you want a 2026 federal grant strategy, right now you need to be thinking about, okay, what has changed? What do I know is true, right? What do we need to be doing? And then additionally, we do have new priorities out of this administration. So again, to Rachel's point, it's not just been, hey, we're not interested in this. It's also, hey, we're interested in this. And when I see a shift in priority areas, what I am often concerned with is the fact that if those priority areas have not received investment in the past, are they even ready to get the investment? And so I think one of the biggest challenges that we might see in 2026 is that there is all this money for which, let's say, rural communities are going to be the priority recipient. But a lot of rural organizations have not had federal funding and have not pursued federal funding. So are they ready to compete? And we saw this, and this is not specific to this administration. It's really specific to this shift in priorities, right? We saw the same thing under the Biden administration. All of a sudden, diverse-led organizations were encouraged to apply. There was some TA, but ultimately it really didn't reach those entities because they weren't ready. And so when I think about what do organizations that do feel aligned with this administration, what should they be doing? You need to be prepared to apply, right? And so to me, that's education. That's attending sessions like this. This is getting on agency websites and figuring out, okay, how are we aligned? We know that rural, for example, is going to be a priority for this administration, but how does that actually look under each of the individual agencies for which you might align? So my encouragement is really find the education, find the resources you need, talk to other organizations that have federal funding to figure out what you really need to be doing to get ready.
Yeah, 100%. And I mean, we have folks in the chat. So true, everybody is saying. I think we're slowly but surely veering into adaptation territory. So there's this new landscape. All these things are changing. Sometimes they're changing weekly. We have projects to fund. We need to stay prepared. We need to stay competitive. So what are we doing? We're staying on top of it. We're going to these education sessions. We're getting the information that we need to be ready when that comes up. But I can also say that 92% of organizations are changing their fundraising strategies. So this is even higher than the number that reported feeling impacted. If you remember back to our first stat, that was 85% of organizations said they were impacted. We have 92% now saying that they're already adapting their fundraising strategies. So they're being proactive. They're adapting before they've even been hit, so to speak. So I'll get into the strategies they shared with us in a moment. But before I do, Rachel and then Fielding, I'd love to hear from you. What are you seeing that's working for organizations that seem to be adapting well and weathering this storm right now? What are they doing?
I think the fact that you're even thinking about change is one of the biggest factors because you have to be sharks right now. Because the old saying, like, if you sharks have to keep moving forward. And so I think that's really what it is that there has to be an understanding and a collective awareness and approach to how we're going to address this. You have to look at each of your different fundraising sources, doing risk assessments of seeing what's in jeopardy and how are we addressing this, revamping storytelling. So I think that that's, and being very targeted and really having, I mean, philanthropy has always been relationship building. It's always been about, and not just calling somebody when you need them, but actually developing some kind of long-term partnership and think and rethinking and reprioritizing. I was speaking with the CEO. They lost $900 million like overnight. I mean, that was huge because they were focused on supporting immigrants and refugees, and that money just kind of poof went away. And so I spoke to him, and he was still, I wouldn't say upbeat, but he was weathering. And he was saying, well, we just need to focus on this area because this area is where we're going to see some potential for actually continuing the work of our organization. We really do feel that it has value. So I think it's about, looking at coming up with very strategic, focused analysis and plan for each of the different funding sources and really determining what is at risk, which of your funding, because not all government funding is at risk, and it depends. Is it discretionary? Are these entitlement grants? So it's really important to assess that. And getting, and how active is your board? How are they engaged with the work that you're doing, and what are you working with them on to help them be a part of your process? So I feel like there's just, all of these different things that I think people are doing, and some of them are, changing their approach to reach out to, the federal government or even state, if they're pass through funding, on different opportunities. So I think those that are really taking a collective look at everything and coming up with new priorities, revising the strategic plan, are the ones that are really working hard to make a difference in supporting their communities and moving forward and weathering this.
Fielding, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, a couple of things. When I first started thinking about this question, part of my brain went, okay, so what does it mean for an organization to be adaptive? Because I think part of this question is like, where do we go for funding, right? And the other part of this question maybe feels a lot less comfortable because adaptive might mean that you are cutting a program, right? Adaptive might mean that you're right sizing a program. It might mean that another organization in your community is better positioned to run that program. So it might mean sunsetting a program and handing it off to another organization. So I think those are like really hard decisions to think about, but that is the adaptiveness that is happening in the sector right now. And we saw this in 2008. I think we're going to continue to see it over the next 12 to 18 months as these impacts continue to filter down. And so I wonder even, what is a grant writer's role in having some of those conversations? Because one of the things that I do think is true and is not a great thing about federal grants is that because they are so big and because so many programs have been funded for so long, we have organizations that have created some of their most important programs to match federal regulation. They're maybe not designed in a way that is best for the community. And the only funder of that program has ever been a federal agency. And so when that funding is cut, unfortunately, many of these nonprofits are not set up to fund it because their funders don't know about the program. They just talk about it as this program of, HHS, right? And so I think we need to be really clear with our existing funders about what is happening. And so, one of the pieces that feels really important right now, and that probably everyone on this call can speak to, is like your relationships when it comes to foundation funding are trump everything, right? And so what I would personally be doing, and what I'm telling my clients to do, is identify your 5 to 10 foundation funders that have been with you for 3, 5, or more years. And you are going to go to them and you are going to have a heart to heart. You are going to tell them the challenges you're experiencing. You're going to talk about what happens to your population when Medicaid gets cut, right? These are very real conversations that we have to be having with our donors to build trust with them. They need to know what's actually happening, because what happened in 2008 is like organizations just closed and their funders didn't even know it was going to happen, right? And so we need to learn from that, and we need to think differently about our funders that for whom we do have a longer term relationship. What would I be asking for? I would be asking for multi-year commitments, right? Even if they can't make a hard commitment, ask for a verbal commitment and ask that you not have to reapply every single year. I would be asking for general operating funding explicitly. This is what we need right now. It's going to go to all of these different programs. This is why this is so important right now. I would also be thinking about going through the back door. So many larger foundations have a back door, right? And it's just about having a relationship with the program officer and making a request. So I have several clients who have gone through the back door and gotten, 6, 7, 8-figure gifts because they made a direct ask. It was clearly aligned with what the foundation was going to do, and they were explicit about the ways in which federal funding cuts were going to impact their ability to continue to do work in the community. And then the last option, I think, is actually asking for a no-cost loan. Like if you know that, for example, in the case where maybe your federal funding is frozen right now because you can't do drawdowns right now, maybe you ask for a low or no-cost loan from a foundation. This is something they can do to weather that. It's called an operating loan in the for-profit world. But there are tools that can help us get through a really sticky, difficult time, and they can be our partners. So the more transparent we can be with our funders, those that you already have a relationship with, I think the better they are positioned to be able to offer, whether that's financial or whether that's, hey, we can help you actually merge with this organization you want to merge with, right? But if we treat our funders more like partners, and that means being transparent, that means sharing the hard stuff, right? And not being afraid that they're just going to cut the money because you're struggling. Our funders want our organizations to succeed. So I'm stressing transparency with those foundation funders.
Thank you both. And we're seeing a lot of agreement in the chat. We're also seeing folks mention other things like DAFs. And I'm going to speak to all of these really briefly because all of this reflects what folks told us in our survey as well. I'm going to start from the bottom, actually. But Fielding, you talked about some of those hard choices that you have to make. Adapting might mean making a tough call. And so reducing fundraising capacity is unfortunately a very real thing for many nonprofits right now. Only 13% reported having to do that right now. The majority are reallocating bandwidth across other fundraising channels and mechanisms. So I know in the chat we have some folks talking about DAFs, donor advised funds. About a third of the nonprofits we spoke to are starting to focus on DAFs. Let us know in the chat if you have any nuggets of wisdom for those of us who have not really scoped that out yet. Earned revenue is another one, and then events and campaigns. But I actually want to focus on our 3 big swingers here, expanding individual giving. So this one doesn't surprise me. It's such a stable revenue stream for so many nonprofits, right? So leaning into what you already know to be working. This is what Fielding is saying with foundations as well, but trying to scale that even further. It just makes sense. And you can appeal to donors too, right? They see what's going on. They understand why you may need them to step up right now. And then the 2 strategies that are the thing that most nonprofits report pivoting to actually both relate to grants. I want to point out we surveyed organizations with existing grant programs. So this is not a general consensus across all US nonprofits, but I actually think this makes it more valuable. Of nonprofits that already do rely to some extent on grants, what are they doing to stay funded? They're actually leaning further into grants. So pursuing private and corporate funders is the top pivot. And then the runner-up strategy here is just getting more grant applications out the door, writing faster, submitting more, and trying to line up as many opportunities as possible. That's what we're seeing nonprofits say that they're doing. We have plenty of anecdotal evidence for this, but I think this data actually also points to more objective proof that there is and will continue to be an increase in competition for these private dollars, right? So let's talk a little bit about what it takes to stand out and be successful in this landscape. And I want to make sure we're sticking to time here. So I'm actually just going to go one question for each of you here. Rachel, maybe you can start us off with this one, but for organizations used to public funding, what advice do you have as they start expanding into private grants? So maybe folks that lost funding this year, they're pivoting to foundations or corporations, they need to bridge that gap. What's going to feel different?
Well, I think the biggest difference is that with federal grants, there's a formula. There's a formula of responding to the prompts, which are the requirements in the application. You can see the criteria, how they're weighted. So it's very clear, on how you need to respond. As long as you respond to the prompts using the language, then you have a higher success rate. There's obviously more to it than that, but it's much clearer with private grants. There's definitely more relationship building, and sometimes, getting to the place, I know Fielding mentioned this before, of actually just requesting funding, and this is with funders that you might already have a relationship with, and developing some kind of multi-year gift, and those take time to develop, because I also know now you don't just want to start spamming private foundations with applications. There has to be a good fit. There has to be some way to communicate through different ways outside of just um, applying to all different opportunities. It has to make sense. You really have to do the research that's needed in order to identify those sources that will be a good fit for you. Do they accept unsolicited proposals? Are they, shifting their focus areas, especially now, given the changes in the federal funding environment? Are they adapting as well to what they're focusing on? So geographically, so there's a lot more nuance with regard to private funding opportunities, and also looking at corporate versus family foundation versus private foundation. All three of those have different strategies. Family foundation is much more like a major donor. Corporate foundations is a little bit more formal, but again, if they have a local, if it's not a national, if they have, like, if I'm thinking of something like a Bank of America, where they might have more of a regional office, then there could be more of a relationship developed. So there's different approaches depending on the size of the foundation, and just having inclusion of more of a storytelling communication approach, as to what Fielding said before, to really identify how are you going to use those funds, how are you going to apply that into your what you're trying to do to either compensate for any federal funding loss or continue the work that you're already doing. So there's just different ways to do that, in terms of how you approach the applications.
Thank you, Rachel. And I think there's so many things I want to circle back to here. This idea of it has to be a really good fit. You have to front load a lot of the research. I think that is something that's maybe going to be surprising to folks who are very used to public funding opportunities, although that's not to say there isn't research and, good match that goes into that. But we'll actually speak on that a little bit in just a moment. I want to flip the question, and Fielding, I'll come to you with this one, but many organizations that have lost public funding are now pivoting towards private and corporate grants. We just established that. That does mean more seasoned federal grantees in that pool of applicants, right? So can you give us a little insight into the edge that federal grantees might have here, and then how other applicants can actually stay competitive?
Yeah, so I would actually argue that just being federally funded doesn't actually give you a huge edge in many foundation competitions. And the reason for that is you are used to speaking to federal criteria, and it's much more like technical writing than it is like personal writing. And some foundations, family foundations in particular, you really need to know who you're speaking to. And the relationship is going to often trump just a blind application, even if your program is so high quality. So the benefit is if you can translate your existing materials to a national foundation that is going to have much more rigorous standards for evaluation. I'm thinking like an RWJF if you're in the health space, right? Health equity space. But I don't think just because you've been writing federal grants that you have a leg up in the foundation space. You have to be able to translate your work, and you always need to keep in mind who you're speaking to. So there are benefits, but I think those are really held to thinking about a national foundation as opposed to local relationships.
I'm muted. That rarely happens. That's been something that I think people have been sort of alluding to, but not really being able to ask outright. And I think your take is actually really interesting, where just because you are a federal grantee doesn't mean you necessarily have an upper hand from the get-go, right? And so I think that's a really interesting perspective. I'm gonna let Rachel and Fielding take a breather for a minute because we're gonna transition to our Q&A in just a few moments. So Rachel and Fielding, I'm gonna give you a chance to drink some water and sort of review those questions that have been rolling in because we got a lot of them. For folks that dropped questions in the chat, we have saved all of them. In the meantime, on top of all of this great intel, I promised you all two things. First was a list of grant opportunities. So Tabitha asked in the chat, if I want to start finding these private opportunities, where do I go? You go with me for the next 5 minutes. I'm going to set you up with that right now. The second thing I promised you was a sneak peek at something very exciting launching soon. So let's take the next 5 minutes to do that while we give our speakers a little breather. So what we're going to do is for all our new folks in the room, so for folks who are not currently Instrumentl users, you're going to go ahead and click this link I just put in the chat. Customers, hang tight for just a moment so we can get our new friends set up here before we get to the big reveal. Yes, Alan, this is a sneak peek for everybody in the chat asking if you'll get a transcript. You will. You'll also get the recording. So I'll share out all the resources. So users, hang tight for a moment. We're going to get our new friends set up. Folks who are here for the first time, go ahead and click that link. It's going to give you access to Instrumentl totally for free, no strings attached, for 2 weeks. Here's the link once more. And yes, this is going to include the entire grant database too. This is special access we create for workshops like this one to give you a chance to take it for a spin, get that head start, right? What Tabitha's asking for. So once you click that link, you'll see a sign up form that looks like this. Go ahead and fill it out. It's 3 easy steps. I'm with you every step of the way here. So just get started with that basic information. And then once you've filled it out, you'll see a screen that looks like this. This is your chance to actually get some one-on-one time with our grant strategists. These are people who can support you one-on-one, give you a really personalized experience, catered to your specific needs. I really recommend you taking us up on this offer. It's free, but because I'm here walking you through it right now, you can also hit that skip button and get right into the platform with me. Then we're going to go ahead and select our organization's location and fiscal year. So I'm going to pause here for just a moment and make sure everyone is following. Give me a thumbs up or a yes in the chat if you've gotten to where I've gotten. I'll wait for just a moment so I can give folks a chance to catch up. For folks who are putting questions in the chat, we're collecting all of them. We do have a lot of them. All right, I'm seeing some yeses and some thumbs up. Not yet says CB. I'm gonna go slowly, CB, so you'll have a chance to catch up. Once you've done that, you're gonna see a screen that looks similar to this. This is where we're going to actually do the fun part. We're gonna curate our own grants. So we're gonna pick a project of ours, just one of our projects, not our organization as a whole, but just one thing that we're looking for grant funding for. And we're gonna put in a quick description here about what our project does. So for mine, I've chosen an outdoor education project that works with youth with disabilities across Illinois. So once I put this description in here, who I serve, what I do, what my outcomes are, Instrumentl is going to generate keywords for me. So you can see this is what it's going to use to match me to grant opportunities. These are the ones it thinks I should be using based on the description I just gave it. So I'm going to go ahead and select some of the ones that work best for me. I'm going to start with, 4 or 5. And then once you do that, you're going to hit next. And we're going to answer a couple more questions about our project. So we're going to say what type of applicant we are. I'm a nonprofit, but let's say I'm also working with an elementary school. You're going to select whatever is applicable for you. I am not faith-based, but if you are, you can select that here. And then we're going to select where our project takes place. So my project takes place in Illinois, like I said. So I'm going to go ahead and select all of Illinois. We have summer camps everywhere. You'll select the counties that work for you, and this makes sure that you're being matched with national opportunities as well as those ultra-local funders that just want to go after one specific county. And then I don't have a specific grant size I'm looking for, so I'm not going to select anything here. And I'm going to select what I'm going to use the funding for. So general operating, projects, and the type of funders I want to see grants from. So I'm going to select everything but the government ones. I don't want to see that right now. I'm going to hit save and exit, and I'm going to wait for my matches to load. This is where the magic happens. And we're going to wait for that for just a second. And let's see what I've been matched with. Okay, so are folks with me here? For folks, I see Christy has an expired free trial. I'm going to share a link in the chat. If you have an expired free trial, you can actually request an extension, and I'll tell you more about that in just a second as well. So here are the matches that I've gotten. I have 108 to explore, and I'm really curious, pop quiz for our Instrumentl users in the room right now. Does anything look different to you here? As I'm scrolling through my matches, I'm looking at this, this foundation I've been matched with. Anything standing out? Anything catching your eye? Denise, I'll make sure to reach out to you right after this. Aaron, Ryan, you guys are our winners. Match insights. Okay, so yes, this little section right here, match insights. This is one small part of a huge revamp we've made with our entire prospecting process. So now when you're matched with a grant, Instrumentl will tell you why. We're going to factor in funders' historical giving patterns and geography. So if a funder claims to fund nationally, but they've never given in your region, you'll see that here. So I can see this funder is open to funding in Illinois, but they have never given in Illinois. So I'm like, probably I'm not going to go after this funder, right? It's also going to pull in other nuances like the funder restricting this grant to organizations with budgets under 5 million. Maybe this actually makes me want to consider them more. So this is fun, but this is not even the most exciting part. Although honestly, this is pretty hard to top. These match insights, like I said, are just a small part of our brand new prospecting assistant. And you guys are about to be the first to see it. Are you ready? Okay. Instrumentl is already the fastest way to find relevant grants, but it's about to get even faster with our new AI prospecting assistant. So what you do, you describe your project in your own words, and your prospecting assistant is going to ask smart follow-up questions, will understand what you really need, surface the most relevant grants, even when funders use different keywords. So there's no more wrestling with rigid taxonomies, keywords that don't totally describe your work. Forget all of that. And just like we saw, it'll also clearly explain why each match fits your organization. So you can quickly prioritize the best opportunities and identify where you need to dig deeper. Now, this is not widely available yet, but all of you here have a way to get early access. Y'all are the first bunch getting this offer. Here's what you have to do. So if you're a customer, if you're currently an Instrumentl user, this one's easy. Fill out the form I'm about to drop in the chat. So Instrumentl users, go ahead and fill out that form if you want early access to Prospecting Assistant. For folks who have tried Instrumentl in the past, you want to use this opportunity to get back in there, explore with our new Prospecting Assistant, go ahead and request a trial extension. And finally, for all our new folks in the room, if you signed up for a trial today, so if you just walked through that with me, you are already on our early access list. If you haven't had a chance to sign up yet, I'm going to drop that link right here in the chat. And make sure you get that today so you can get on this early invite list. Everyone who takes action here, keep an eye on your inbox. My colleagues will reach out to get you set up. I am seeing a lot of questions come in about I can't access this or I can't get in. I'm going to go through this chat after this webinar and follow up with all of you. So I can't do it right now. There's too many of us here, but I will circle back. On that note, I'm actually going to paste all the links in the chat again. And on that note, Rachel and Fielding, are we ready to jump back into some questions? We got a lot of them. Okay, I'm gonna go into the first one, which is for, oh gosh, we have so many. Okay. We have a question here. Should it be an in-house grant writer's responsibility to solicit, outreach, and nurture relationships with potential private funders? Or is it better to have chief philanthropy officers or CEOs do that outreach? And also, Rachel Fielding, we have a lot of questions. Let's try to just go rapid fire with these so we can knock out like 5 or 6.
My suggestion is to match like to like. So if the foundation has staff, call the staff. If they only have an executive director, have your chief development officer or the executive director of your organization make that call. So that's like bare minimum how I kind of make those decisions.
Rachel, any different take there, or does that sound just about right?
Yeah, that sounds, yeah, I think that that's a great approach.
Okay, we have another question here. New tax laws that will make it harder for foundations and donors to give money. Is this a concern? Should it be on our radar?
Yes, I think it should be on your radar as well as the corporate giving caps as well. So definitely something to consider and probably speak with your accountant about and what the implications are, especially with regard to how much funding you might already be receiving. So there definitely are going to be a little bit more of thresholds for what foundations and corporate entities can give. And so there's a difference between the corporate and entity and the corporate foundation. So I would just be very mindful of that and thinking about your giving strategy or receiving fundraising strategy.
Okay, perfect. And next question, this one's from Allison. Are we seeing a shift towards funding more faith-based organizations? Is this an opportunity for faith-based organizations?
Yes.
Straight to the point.
Yeah, anything else? Yes.
Okay, we have a question from Claudia. This one's a long one. Our main pass-through entity is not communicating with us about threats to federal funding commitments, probably for legal reasons, but it introduces too much uncertainty about continuing support, right? So what's the best way to get information other than reading documents that are coming from the administration?
Ooh, that's tough. I'd be curious if this is, if it's a state government, if it's a nonprofit, because I think there's different, but I agree there could be a gag order on what you can say, what you can't say. So I would see if there's any others who are receiving funding and what they're might able, maybe collaborate with some others if you have an understanding of, who else has been a recipient or subrecipient of this funding. So I would see if there's a potential way to get information there. But yeah, that's tough because I'm sure that a lot of things, just as someone who lives in DC and who knows a lot of things happening at the federal government level, a lot of times people at the who work in the agencies don't know things in advance. They're hearing things as you are firsthand. So I would just be mindful of that because there might not be as much to share because they're waiting to get feedback.
Yeah, and I would just add, exercise some empathy because in all likelihood they're not sharing because they're terrified of saying the wrong thing and giving you bad advice. And so they also can't act. And so this is impacting all of us in very different ways. And there are additional requirements of pass-through entities than there are of those who are, towards the bottom and receiving those funds. So keep that in mind, but it sounds incredibly frustrating. And this is probably something that could be answered in like a deep dive one-on-one as opposed to trying to muddle through good advice, in this way.
Yeah, that makes sense. And we have a lot of follow-up questions on the faith-based funding. So if one of you wants to take a short but maybe slightly deeper stab at what does it actually mean that this is an opportunity for faith-based, and also what faith are we talking is one of the questions in this chat.
Oh gosh, this is a political landmine.
Rachel, I'll answer it if you'd like me to.
Yeah, go ahead, go Fielding, go for it.
I tend to be very direct. I mean Christian organizations, and I mean that often religious organizations have not been a priority recipient category And we are seeing that open up through a variety of mechanisms, including potential charter schools, for example, that can maybe now have a religious designation. So there's a lot of, I think, new opportunities for religious organizations that have not been there in the past at the federal level.
Okay, perfect. And I have one final question here. This is again a loaded one, but maybe just like the quickest take that both of you can give on this. Michelle wants to know, do you have any examples of successful nonprofit collaborations as a way to share grant funding? Is this an appealing thing to propose to funders in this landscape?
Uh, Absolutely. I mean, we've always talked about collaborative funding, so this is not a new concept, but I definitely think leaning into that is really critical now. So an example of this is an organization that is like multi-sector, so university, nonprofit, um, local government agency coming together to receive a big multi-year federal grant. And I think that, because I think what you really need to be clear about is who's going to be the primary recipient and to be clear about the partnership and how you're going to divide funding and how that looks. As subrecipients, are they going to be supporters? So I think you have to be very, very clear about the partnership parameters before you actually start to seek funding. So I think it's important to, be mindful of that and also look at the previous recipients and see who has received funding, what type of entity. Because I was actually on an opportunity that didn't go well because the entity that was applying should not have applied. It should have been one of the other subrecipient partners because that's who they were funding. So just be mindful of that.
And I would encourage partnership around efforts, not just partnership around grants, because when you have partnerships around efforts, each of your different entity types can pursue different types of funding, right? And so you actually create a more stable regional effort where you're more impactful for your target population because you've got multiple streams of funding that you're able to blend, braid, match, etc., because you've got more pots to pull from.
Okay, perfect. And on that note, I'm going to wrap us up here. Nobody leave. I have resources to share with all of you. So don't drop off just yet. I still have you for 2 minutes, guys. First things first, though, Rachel and Fielding, thank you so much for your time, your expertise, your candor. You have been two of the most reliable and consistent and pragmatic voices all year. I am very grateful, not just for the posts that you share weekly on LinkedIn, because I get a lot of my information from you, to be honest, but also on top of everything you do for the organizations you support, that you have time to come here and provide guidance for our Instrumentl community. So thank you so much. Folks, I'm going to put some links in the chat for how to stay in touch with and continue to learn from Rachel and Fielding. Everyone stop typing in the chat for a second. I don't want these links to get buried. Just kidding. You can keep thanking them. They deserve it. Here is Rachel's newsletter. Go ahead and subscribe to that. And here is Fielding's newsletter and some resources you can get. Thank you both so much for your time. A couple more housekeeping items before I let you all go. Remember, all of you here are the first bunch to get early access to our new AI prospecting assistant. These are perks of this particular event. So make sure you get this action item done today. I'll put all these links in the chat again. Whichever one applies to you, go ahead and click that link or save that link. And the final thing I'll share, if Prospecting Assistant got you excited, just know there is so much more where that came from. We have even more exciting new tools coming out because grants are changing. Nonprofits, you all are stepping up. So is Instrumentl. We're building tools that are rising to the moment to help you find better matches faster, as we saw with Prospecting Assistant, but also help you draft, refine, and manage proposals in one place, simplify post-award management. So if you feel like you're always digging for that one document that has that one sentence that you want to reuse for this new proposal, or maybe you're like, I can't quite keep track of the dates and terms and conditions in this grant award, you do not want to miss what's coming on November 5th. I would love to see you all there. You are all such a thoughtful and energetic group. I want to spend more time with you. And we're going to be joined by our founders, Gary and Angela. So it's going to be a really fun group. Here's the link to register for that. Go ahead and save your spot. And on that note, I'm all wrapped up here. Thank you so much for being with us here today. So many familiar faces, so many new faces. It was a blast. A lot of big topics were covered. Fielding and Rachel, I will also let you say any parting words.
The chat was amazing. I want to have conversations with all of you. So thank you so much for participating and giving us lots of great questions to think about and for supporting one another.
Yeah, and the thing that I've been sharing with everybody, it's really hard to scenario plan when we don't know what the scenarios are. So I think that we're all trying to navigate this. So just keep asking questions, keeping staying engaged because we're all learning and growing with each other. So I think collaboration right now and supporting one another is the best way for us all to collectively get through this.
Absolutely. And this instrumental chat, like most of our instrumental chats, to be honest, has been such a place of support and community. I know Siobhan called that out as well. So thank you all for showing up, not just to listen to Fielding and Rachel, but also to show up for one another. This really means a lot to me as the host of this event, but also to everybody else who's here. You are part of what makes this environment so special. So thank you all. I'm going to drop that link to the event one more time. I hope to see you all there. And the last thing, if any of you are still having issues getting into your instrumental trial, my email address is right here on the screen. I'll also type it in. Just shoot me a quick message and I will take a look at what is going on. I know there were a handful of you who got stuck on a page here and there, so just let me know what that was. Thanks, everyone. I hope you have a fantastic rest of your week.